of the Silver Consolidated School District Board of Education. It's May 21st, 2018, and the time is 5:34. Mrs. Hernandez, would you conduct a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mrs. Montenegro?
Here.
Mr. Khan?
Here.
Dr. Diaz?
Here.
And Mr. Flores?
Here.
Thank you. The only item on our work session agenda this evening is a facility improvement request for safety and security, and that's Mr. Barry Ward, Director of Maintenance and Grounds. Mr. Ward, welcome.
Thank you, President Miller. Thank you for having me here. Members of the board, Superintendent Brown, Mr. Hernandez, I think I got everybody. In light of all the chaos that's been going around, tragic events with school shootings and numerous other things, a few months ago it became kind of apparent to Mr. Brown that we needed to make some serious focus on what the district was doing and what we needed to do to ensure the safety of our students and staff and community at large in our campuses and around our campuses. And he started a security commission, of which I am one of the participants representing the district, and that's headed up by Mr. Flores. And we've had several meetings to this point. We've gone and we've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different issues and looking at what direction to best take to accumulate the data and the information and the input, feedback from both community and campus locations, principals, administration, et cetera, and so forth. And we're still accumulating a lot of that data, so there's still a lot of decisions to be made, and this will be an ongoing process. But we're sort of at a starting point. One of the first things that Mr. Brown was able to get set up was getting threat assessments done by our local law enforcement. And although we have not received any written reports for any of those locations, we have gotten lists of things that were concerns that they had, as well as other things that principals had, because when they did do that, they met with staff and principals, walked campuses, reviewed what policies and procedures were, and came up with a series of suggestions for everybody to take into consideration. I have, and Mr. Brown has, and Mr. Flores has, only three, I think, that received that information from all the principals, and we sort of sat down and reviewed a lot of that. A lot of it doesn't have much to do with the buildings and the facilities themselves. There are things like radios or things of that nature that, making sure doors are locked.
Mr. Ward, can you use the mic, because I can't hear you and I'm sitting closer.
Push the button.
There you go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
But to deal with to bring this up to where we are at the buildings, I think that's kind of where I'm at and why I'm here. The types of things I'll just give you a quick rundown of the types of things building-wise that they came up with. And this varies by campus. Some of them are common amongst all campuses, and some of them are just what certain places would like. But some people feel there are needs for cameras in the schools. A lot of the campuses have sight doors or sight glass in the doors. They'd like to get those things tinted. Electric with remote access parking lot gates was suggested. Magnetic key locks for all the exterior doors. Modifications to fencing, the addition of fencing, period. In the case of Cliff, that was their primary concern, because that campus is open 360 degrees all the way around. Upgrades to door hardware, the construction of causeways to connect buildings that are separated, say like the high school to the PE complex, so that kids aren't necessarily having to travel inside and outside. Creating vestibules, separation walls, so that when the public does enter the campus, there is a wall that separates their access to where the students and staff are. One of the primary things, though, that seemed to come up at most locations was installing cameras with intercoms and a key latch lock to the primary location, the point of entry for the public to get into the school once school starts. and that to be tied to the office so that those people could then have conversations with whoever it is that wants to get in, render a decision whether they will or will not get in, and if it's okay, they can release that lock on the door and they can gain access. And that is both that and fencing Cliff, all the way around Cliff, are the two things that I've been tasked with trying to accomplish this summer. And we're working towards accomplishing that right now. We haven't gotten that all worked out yet, but I think that'll all happen. A lot of the other things, though, we're going to have to make a decision of what it is we're going to do, what takes the priorities, and this is just the list that we were given by the principals from conversations. I think it prudent to wait until we actually get reports from the police, because they may or may not be. Another thing that, so we're looking at following through with this stuff as time goes on. Now, the state allocated $14 or $16 million, I think, to go towards school security this legislative session. And that's being distributed by the PSFA through their normal granting process or capital improvement process. And I received a letter that they are tentatively opening that grant process up June this year, so next month. Whether that comes to pass exactly or not, I don't know, but it's coming up soon. And I think Mr. Brown and I have discussed that it would be a good opportunity to take advantage of that for a lot of this other stuff, so that we can get some additional funding to offset our expense and go from there. And we're we're a step ahead on that, because one of the requirements will be a threat assessment that will need to be provided to the PSFA with each of these, and their threat assessment author of preference is law enforcement. So we've kind of hit that one right on the head, and we can use those. And of course, and Mr. Brown, I think, is working with the law enforcement people right now as far as getting the written reports done. Okay. Other things that we've done to date, one of the things that needed to be done was, or people had concern about, was upgrading door hardware. We have done an awful lot of that aspect of things already. We've been going through and changing out old hardware, changing levers to panics. And some of this isn't even necessary for ADA access, but it makes sense on a traffic flow access for potential threats in the campuses. And we've done a lot of that already. And if we could get all these things kind of moving forward from the buildings aspect, it should make a lot of difference as far as the access control of the buildings, because I think a lot of that is key. Now, we can do all of these things, and I've shared this with Mr. Brown and Mr. Flores and the committee, and what we really end up with is it's only going to be as good as the people that are basically running it and the policy. So I think our biggest goal, at least in my mind, is staff buy-in and making sure that they're motivated and moving forward to that. I think part of what PSFA's and the state allotted this money for, too, is, at least according to Jonathan, who's the director of the buildings portion of PSFA, was for training. And we've talked some about various sources of training. I know POMS is available to do all sorts of training in this aspect, and this really doesn't cost the district anything. Where we're going with that, how that's being set up, I think we're still trying to determine at this point. But that's kind of where we're at now. And now you probably have a lot of questions, so in order to keep this right on time for you, shoot. And I'll do my best to answer what I do know.
Members of the board, questions for Mr. Ward?
I have two questions. One is, and I think maybe Mr. Brown might be able to answer this better, but when do we foresee that we're going to have those reports back from law enforcement? That's one question.
Captain Villalobos is currently working on the threat assessments that he conducted. PSFA has requested that they be on a specific form, and so he's in the process of researching the form
CDC and
so that he can complete those for us.
Okay. So, because it sounds like that's the preferred method, and it looked like when I saw the paperwork that they were going to give priority to the people who use law enforcement for the threat assessment and got their stuff in a timely fashion. So I think those two tied together give us a good shot at some funding if we can get it in.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the second question that I had is when we talk about the funding through this grant, it's a grant, right?
Yeah, they're calling it a
Or
grant in
funding,
the letter, so.
Okay, state
That's
funding
what I
at
will
whatever
call it,
point.
that it will be state funding. I also think that there's, from what I'm understanding, I'm not sure how this is working, how it's to be directed or anything else like that, but I think the federal government has allotted about $50 million to the state. And how and where that's being distributed, I have not really heard much more than it was there.
Okay, that was on my list. But, so included, I guess my question is when they say infrastructure and changes for security purposes, would the cameras and intercoms with the key latch be part of that? I would assume yes, right? But could that extend into like the radios and other things that are tangible but not really?
Well, I spent about 2 hours with Jonathan talking with him and his staff that he had with him maybe a month ago, something like that. And the types of things they were looking at were like interior security walls to separate public areas from student areas, creating vestibules, cameras, door hardware, mostly physical type of but he did also mention training. So how they're splitting that up is unclear yet. I haven't seen any published actual documentation that shows exactly what that's going to be, but where he was leaning was toward that. He did really emphasize the importance of radios and how much that seemed to be a huge help in the people he talked at Aztec. So he was really pro radios. Whether it'll be part of what we can use this for, I'm uncertain yet. But it would not surprise me by that conversation.
Okay. And then I know another thing that had been sent out before from the school board had talked about like metal detectors and things like that. Would that be potentially something we could cover with this? I'm not sure. I know a lot of it's
I don't
what
know
is.
the answer to that.
Okay. That's still considered infrastructure though, right? That would be, I
That's
guess as far as
equipment.
eligibility is more the question.
Those are the kinds of things that in the buildings world, you usually consider that equipment.
Okay.
And whether they consider it part of the infrastructure of the deal. It all depends upon how the state is really, where they're really looking and how they're lining up what is critical path stuff versus what is not critical path stuff. And like I said, I have not seen anything in writing that basically outlines that yet.
Okay.
I can only go by the things that I know he told me whenever we were having that meeting about a month ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? I've got a question on the, I guess, the improvements so far, the door hardware. Is that funding coming from HB9 or
Everything I've done to
SB9
this,
and-
everything I've done to this point's been done through SB9 or SB9 or HB33.
Okay. And the fencing and the other things planned for this summer, do you think that's something that we're going to be able to accomplish with that money as well, or are we looking to bond money?
There's a lot of things we're looking at doing this summer. And depending upon where the dollars all end up, my goal is to use SB9 and HB33 for as much of the non-primary bond project items that I can. But when it runs out, we may have to be supplementing some of this stuff.
Is that something that you can keep the board in tune to as far as funding requests? I know we initially talked about using some bond monies, kind of diverting bond monies from, I guess, original requests to safety and security when all the events started happening. But is that something that we can kind of keep
Sure.
a tab on?
Sure. I know that what Mr. Brown had said a month or two ago that he was willing to commit something like $350,000 from the bond funding. I don't know where or what the status of that is or anything else like that. But yeah, there's no reason why you can't know what's going on.
Perfect.
My plans this summer too are going to be exactly the same as last summer in the respect of putting everything that we're doing of a major scale. I mean, we can throw security in there. I mean, this could make that a deal too, and just have that on the website with ongoing projects. One of the things that we could add to the base of those is what the funding source is for what it is we're doing.
I think that'd be good. I think in some respects, it may be appropriate to maybe deter folks by letting them know what we're doing.
Sure.
Other respects, there may be areas where we don't want them to know exactly what's,
And
what's
before and
going
how
on.
we do that, usually I'm discussing with Mr. Brown anyways beforehand, so. And I'm sure he's talking to you guys as well, so before we do anything, I think it'll be pretty much a known, a decision will be made that's not gonna be mine. Let's put it that way, it'll be coming from Mr. Brown and y'all.
all right. And my understanding from the legislative funding is it was 40 million that was appropriated, but it's over the next 4 years,
It's
so
over
10
the
million
next-
a year divided amongst however many school districts.
Yeah, I think there was some
Submit an
other section of
application.
money, because I think he had said something about 14 or 16 million this first year, is what they're looking at, is what, but there again, it's a moving target when you're dealing with that stuff with the state.
Are there questions from the board? Mr. Brown?
No, sir.
All right. Mr. Ward, thank you very much.
And feel free to call if you've got suggestions as far as security or concerns, or, you know, I'll do my best to answer whatever I can. Mr. Brown is, and Mr. Flores, I know, are dealing with it on a global picture. I'm kind of looking at it from one aspect of stuff, so my aspect of it is only one piece. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes everything on our, for our work session agenda this evening. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Got a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we're adjourned until 6 for our regular meeting. And the time now